Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into how some of America's most famous neighborhoods weren't really built by choice, but by pure necessity. We're going to see how, when a society puts up walls to keep people out, those same people get incredibly creative and build a fortress to survive within those walls.
So let's just jump right in with this really powerful idea that inside the crowded slums of the 19th century, whole parallel societies started to form. And listen, we're not just talking about social clubs here. No, these were basically shadow governments, created because, well, the actual city government was often looking the other way.
To really get why this happened, we've got to travel back in time. Picture New York's Lower East Side in the late 1800s. This was a really tough place to be. Survival meant you were fighting poverty, you were fighting disease, and you were fighting discrimination every single day.
Which brings up this massive question, right? If you're legally blocked from becoming a citizen, from owning property, or even just getting basic protection under the law, how on earth do you build a community? Well, the answer they came up with was to build walls of their own, not with bricks, but with social and economic networks. So, our first case study is the amazing story of New York's Chinatown. You have to understand, it's not just a neighborhood, it is a living monument to both terrible systemic exclusion and at the same time just incredible human resilience.
You know, the story of New York's Chinatown doesn't actually start in New York. It starts thousands of miles away. This isn't a story about people searching for opportunity. It's a story about people fleeing from intense, often violent racism. Chinese laborers who were key to building the Transcontinental Railroad were literally driven out of the American West, and they ended up seeking refuge on the East Coast.
And it is so hard to overstate the impact of this one single law. In 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act became the first U.S. law to ban an entire ethnic group. It didn't just stop new workers from coming in. It also meant that if you were already here, you could never become a citizen. This created, by design, a permanent underclass, and it shaped the community for almost 100 years.
So this law led to this really unique and difficult social situation, a Bachelor Society. Just try to imagine a neighborhood made up almost entirely of men who were legally forbidden from bringing their wives or starting families. So what happens when you don't have those traditional family units? Well, you have to invent new ways to support each other, and you have to do it fast. And the community's response was just brilliant. To survive, they built their own government, the Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association, or the CCBA. I mean, this thing was basically a government unto itself. It settled business arguments, it collected its own taxes to pay for social services, it even arranged funerals. It did all the stuff the city of New York wouldn't do for them.
Now, there's actually a sociological term for this level of self-sufficiency. It's called institutional completeness. Think about it. It's when a community literally builds everything it needs to function internally. Its own economy, its own justice system, its own social safety net. It's the ultimate response to being locked out. And while it created this incredible tight-knit community, it could also create deep isolation from the rest of the city.
Now this whole dynamic, it wasn't just happening in Chinatown. Right next door, a very similar story of survival was playing out in the neighborhood that would become Little Italy.
Okay, so the reasons they came were different, for sure. One group was fleeing racial violence inside the US, the other was fleeing droughts and total economic collapse back in southern Italy. But once they got to New York, the problem, the fundamental need for a protective community, was exactly the same.
Their community was also a fortress, but it was set up a little differently. Social life was all about this intense loyalty, not to Italy as a whole, but to your specific village or region. I mean, you literally had Sicilians on Elizabeth Street and folks from Genoa over on Baxter Street. It created this patchwork of tiny little enclaves inside the bigger one.
So for decades, you have these two fortresses, Chinatown and Little Italy, living right next to each other, separated by this invisible but very real line at Canal Street. But then, a huge shift in federal law was about to change everything and make those borders get real blurry. The game changer was the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act. This was the law that finally tore down that old racist system from the exclusion era. By getting rid of those national origin quotas, it threw the doors open for a new wave of Chinese immigrants. And this time, it included families, which would totally transform Chinatown.
And the effect was huge, and it was fast. This new wave of people, especially women, powered this massive economic boom, all centered on the garment industry. Get this, by 1981, something like 500 new garment factories had popped up, creating this economic engine that just had to expand.
And this is where the actual map of the city starts to change. So while many Italian Americans were starting to move up and out to the suburbs,
Chinatown's booming economy just kept pushing north, right across Canal Street. Economic power was literally redrawing the neighborhood lines of Lower Manhattan.
Okay, so after all that, what does this story really tell us? Why do these powerful communities form in the first place? What's the big takeaway here? Well, the whole thing boils down to this fundamental contradiction. These communities were the architectural answer to a society that wanted their labor but refused to give them citizenship. It's this crazy paradox. Society needed their work, but it refused to make them a real part of society.
The fortresses of Chinatown and Little Italy were absolutely built by exclusion. But that's just one piece of the puzzle. That's only one reason enclaves are formed. So make sure you join us for part 2, where we're going to explore the other massive forces, things like factories, war, and even modern wealth that build these incredible cities within cities.